Thanks everybody for coming who are interested in this subject of analysis of MRs merged in greater than 30 days. So I've seen a lot of good comments already in the document. Let me share my screen here. And so quick summary, of the observations. 4% of MRs merged in March took greater than 30 days to merge. I've got some statistics there on them. About a quarter of the MRs were idle for greater. So what are some of the trends I've noticed in them? There is definitely a significant number at a really high amount, like 90th percentile was 120 days. About a quarter were idle for greater than or equal to a month, sometimes multiple times. About a quarter had scope that was possibly too large for one MR, which was a judgment call, just eyeballing them. I did see a relationship between number of threads per MR and the time to merge. The more threads, the higher the time to merge. About 40% of the MRs took greater than 30 days to merge were from 40 authors out of the 92 total that had one or more that were more than 30 days. So there's kind of a little bit of a cluster there, but not a huge cluster. And median days to merge by label documentation was actually much higher than others, but there were very few ones tagged with documentation. So that might have been, that might not be statistically significant. Are there any thoughts before we talk about draft recommendations, thoughts on the trends?
So when I see 40 authors, 43%, I mean, there's only 200. So it's not like we have like a systemic 40 people doing, I'm trying to think how to describe it, but I guess.
It's not a small percentage.
It's not a small percentage. Okay, all right.
Yeah. That's 20%.
Yeah, but on the other hand, MRs that take a long time, you wouldn't expect a lot of other MRs necessarily during that same period, assuming they were working it, though. Obviously, them going idle for long periods of time means that they're working on other things from that perspective.
Sometimes it was that. I did notice where they were assigned to somebody who left the company. Occasionally that was the case, or sometimes they unassigned themselves and nobody. They commented, "Hey, so and so, could you pick it up?" And they didn't. Or they just unassigned themselves, and it stayed unassigned for a while. So that I didn't notice those things very often. Usually it stayed with the same person.
Okay.
So for the 80th and 90th percentile, that is like the peak, are the population the same under median days? Like are they mostly documentation, or is it a different theme?
It's a great question. I don't know. I do have the data linked, which doesn't have people's names in it. So it's got author IDs. So if I look here, well, you can take a look. I think we could spend some time on that. But here's just by days. This is actual days to merge and the number of them. So like, let's see here. If we take ones, let's say greater than or equal to 90. The average was 135 days. I don't think it says median, but and if you look at the throughput labels, not many. Two documentation ones, just eyeballing it. A lot of backstage, 3 documentation ones. So maybe there is a trend that the documentation ones are often at the high end.
I think row number 5. That's the thing. Folks were using the wrong throughput label because the title says LDAP admin docs. However, backstage throughput was picked up.
Yeah, that's a good point. I did notice as well as sometimes MRs had multiple labels on them that we use for the throughput label. So I don't know how the things pick up one. So I did correct a couple. That didn't have a label, especially. I added one, both in the spreadsheet and in the MR.
Got it.
Yeah, it's a good point.
I'm gonna spend 10 seconds here. This is like something that we've been looking at for a while. It's the type of backstage work, like whether it's a document or something else. I think having backstage right now at the level we're operating is not as helpful. So just want to put it there. We have an issue. Going back to what we talked before, I think row number 7, that's also refactor docs. That's also backstage, and just my point is like there's a number of new documentation here. So role number 12, document new issue summary. That's a feature. So that should be documentation.
Yeah, that's a good point. But what I'll put in here is, even though, however,
I think there's a priority order. So what I'll add is, I think in that calculation is a priority order, and documentation is towards the end. And documentation is frequently collided with other type labels. So maybe reordering that for this analysis or in general might be a good idea to have documentation moved up towards the top. If I remember right, the order was like community contribution, feature, bug, backstage, and then documentation. Lily, you may know based on this analysis.
I think for the purpose of analysis, we don't have to jump on that yet. But yes, I think long haul, we should discuss as a team how we want to have that accounting. But for yeah, go
By
ahead.
the way, Mac, I agree with you. We should try to get backstage down. It feels like it's just too heavily used. Somebody at one point told me that a lot of this is feature work. I've been using 50-50, 50 feature, 50 technical debt. But the problem that I've heard is like if we use the feature label, then that leads to other things like they're expecting documentation to actually be included as part of it. Which, that's where I think we have to make sure that the right behaviors or the right intent is matching with the behaviors.
Yep, totally agree. Is there anything else in terms of a preliminary analysis that we can do here before we move on?
Let me bring up the data to see if I notice anything. I'd love to have some additional fields in addition to, for example, for number of threads, I manually counted them. And there's some other fields I'd love to get as well, which we can talk about, but that would help us find some other trends and validate these.
Is that easy to find in the table, Kyle or Lily, do you know?
I haven't done any analysis on it yet, so I'm not sure if that lives, but yeah.
Okay, then we might want to take it. Go ahead.
I linked down at the bottom to a snippet that derives a lot of those fields. So down in the discussion section, I linked to a snippet that has like days to review, days, like a number of different items that could be helpful. There's probably more fields that we can look to use. And that snippet should encompass the MRs that you're doing. So Wayne, you and I, or Lily, like the three of us, there's some combination of us can figure out how to take the data that's put together in that snippet and add it to the analysis you're doing.
That'd be awesome especially if we could add it to this Periscope.
The chart, yep.
Mm-hmm.
Which we'll see if Periscope logs me in. Yep. Yeah, if we could add that to this, that would be great. This table.
Yeah, those aren't explicit fields. They're derived from certain indicators on other fields. So it's a little bit tedious. Like it's not like adding something to a select statement, but it should be doable.
Okay.
Yeah.
Lily, is that
Wayne,
something
can you give me
is that something you can take the lead on?
I can take a stab on it. Can you just quickly give me a little bit of context behind threads? Is that just like in the notes history?
So I'll just bring up this one as an example. So the field is over here. Number of threads. So so it's just 20 threads.
Oh, I see. Okay. Yeah.
So it's number of different threads, generally from the reviewers and maintainers.
Yeah, so maybe we should make
Gotcha.
sure to define thread. Everybody remember, this is month 2 for Lily. Threads are, and she's a data analyst, not a software developer. Threads are the method to add commentary and potentially get changes associated with an MR. So like it's an opportunity for people to give feedback. And typically what happens is somebody will give some feedback and I forget if you have to determine whether you actually open a thread or not, but then there's response back and forth. And then once the issue is resolved, then they resolve the thread.
Got it. Okay. So it's like
The
for
other two
comment
items, I'm sorry. The other two items that we think is worth looking into, studying is pipelines, is number of times changes were made and basically the CI/CD pipeline was kicked off to check it. And then commits is number of changes done as part of this change. Not number of files updated, but number of changes done to any number of files. So that's what that's about.
Got it. Yeah. I feel like because it's on this page, it probably lives somewhere. So I'll go ahead and track that. And then once I do, I'll add those 3 fields to the current drill down in that Periscope dashboard.
Awesome. So to Mech's point, anything else on just the data we want to talk about before we get into recommendation? All right. So notice a number of folks, there are a couple recommendations added. These are draft. I want to be really clear, these are draft. So idle MRs. MRs go idle, and they then are often forgotten for a while for various reasons. So my initial thoughts were, if a merge request is idle for greater than 2 weeks, have a bot add a comment saying, hey, this has been idle for 2 weeks. You know, maybe consider splitting it out into smaller iterative changes, reassigning, moving non-critical review feedback to separate issues. And if it's greater than 4 weeks, look up the group manager and tag those same recommendations. And maybe this is too much, that just the first one is okay because the managers are often watching the issues. But that was an idea on idle MRs. And adding to that, just before I pause, is MRs that may have fallen through the cracks. It might be that they're idle. It might be that they're not idle. And they're just being worked on over a longer period of time. Is maybe a bot adding a comment around that. And then also a different kind of thing, adding a report in Periscope showing MRs open greater than 4 weeks, and have it part of the director's responsibilities to review that periodically. What does everyone think of these?
This is kind of the same pattern and in line with how we're doing the, sorry for the noise, community contributions report. We have a weekly report that sends out to RayPeg on what are the stale community contributions MRs, and he helps review. Now that is a smaller population. I think we can take some of the learnings there and apply it here. I think having a reminder works great. Maybe even have the bot help set a due date. That might be controversial, but we can explore multiple options here.
And the other thing that I would just suggest, Wayne, is Periscope report might be good. We could also create a triage package like Mech is saying and just assign it to the director. So an issue in GitLab that says, here's your MRs that have been stale for more than 4 weeks. Please take any correct, and you know, whatever the wording is. But triage package might drive action a little bit better than having to go to a report to do it.
How hard is it to generate a triage package? Like, is it something like if we said tomorrow do a quick iteration, you could have it in a week, or is it like, you know, a 6-week effort to just create a triage package? Everybody's smiling, so I know there's a joke here.
It depends on the complexity and how we want to define idle. If idle could be last updated, the field on the MR, I don't think this would be too challenging to at least have like a first iteration, because that field is exposed through the underlying library that we use in our triage ops automation. But if idle is a little bit more specific than that, it would be
last update.
Last update would be fine.
Just last update. Yep.
Yeah. So there may be something I'm missing. So like similar disclaimer, normal disclaimers, but I don't think it would be too hard at using last updated date. We could create an issue, but I'd want to look at the priorities across the team, make sure that this is the right thing to jump in on right now.
It shouldn't be that challenging. I'll leave it to Kyle to schedule. But I think this is near and dear to everyone's heart. So if we need to switch things around, then we're happy to do that too.
Yeah, what I'm wondering is if we just start with a single one for the entire group, and it's going to be super long, but then I get the directors to look at it, and then we get feedback on it based on that to figure out whether or not there's a better way to tune it. Because what I don't want to do is create tuning before premature optimization. So I'm wondering if that would, Wayne, what do you think about that tactic? Or do you think it's better to try to go to EMs, or do you have a...
I think they both have their pros and cons. I'd say we experiment and see how it goes. While also knowing anytime we automatically do something, we run the risk of, we run the benefit, there's a benefit of helping, there's a risk of annoying people with lots of, you know, comment spam and issue spam, et cetera, or maybe perceived as such. So I definitely don't want to do everything on this list, even if we like them all initially. So I actually kind of like the Periscope report a little more, but that's partially because I haven't seen a triage package issue before. So just this, we can make it part of, something we review, Christopher, in your, kind of like we do for availability triage, or we make it an agenda item in your weekly meeting, maybe once a month. I don't know. This is what I prefer, but it's probably because I know it more. I'm more familiar with this kind of thing. But I'm good with either. So one way to do this is, we mark this as Kyle for you to research this one, and
Yeah,
Mech for you to research 1, 2, and 3. Is that
I can do 1, 2, and 3 too. That falls under engineering productivity.
okay?
Hey, Lily, can you also add the labels to this drill down? I'm wondering if there's like a particular group. Like the other way to approach this is maybe go small outside in, or small inside out. So like if there's a particular group that's more problematic, then we could start with that director and that manager or set of managers. We'll need to classify it based on that. I like the suggestion though, Wayne. Maybe that's the discussion we have at the next one, next development meeting, or we start trying that, push that from that perspective. Because right now we're looking at closed, so we need the open list.
Okay.
I like starting small. We could have a limit on the long pole. Like what is the long pole right now? Like 100 something days, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
That's of the closed ones. I don't even know how many open MRs. Do we know how many open MRs we have?
Well, these are closed. Mm.
No, but we can put that as an item that engineering productivity can look into. So as a part of like building the policy, we would be doing dry runs that would say, here's how many would fall in. And if we want to limit it somehow in a triage package or anything like that.
Yeah, I like the triage package. The reason, Wayne, that I like the triage package is it's less at the senior leadership level and more at will be the accountables, but then it gives EMs the ability to actually execute on it, right, from that perspective. So that's the reason why we use triage. They use it a lot for our lower level stuff. And maybe we're not using it in Defend quite yet, but that's definitely, it's been pretty effective, particularly in the dev organization at solving problems like this.
Okay.
I would be cautious for the POC of adding it to the existing team triage package, just because a lot of the feedback we've heard from that is that that's over a little bit. There's a lot to it, and adding more is usually.
Yeah, I would make this a separate exercise. I agree with that.
A separate one. Either if we are generating these issues as a report, just create like MR, stale MR project or whatever in a different bucket, so it's clear that this is a new thing.
Actually, to be honest, if you really want to get this is way too much work, but if you really want to get good at this, you'd go back and refactor that and make it into an epic and then have the issues below that broken out based on type. Because then you could have different team members attacking different sets of the parts of the problem associated with it, right? Because like this is an element, I'm thinking back to the triage package, it would seem like there were like 2 or 3 sections to it. So like just to make the length more manageable from that perspective. But I'm not asking for that feature today.
I see that's something to consider. Right now we don't support ethics, so that's a nice use case to consider how we could break up those larger triage packages. Cool suggestion.
To be clear, these are MRs, correct? We're not going up that level yet. So the existing triage report package is only issues. I think this one calls for another family of.
Well, it generates an issue that lists MRs that you need to go basically address, right? Like
yes.
And I guess that's true. In the other case, it's issues. It's an issue that tracks issues.
Yes.
So in that regard, they're different in that regard. Okay. Yeah. All right.
So another thing is late MRs have more than 2-fold more threads than non-late ones. I was able to do a sampling of MRs that are done merged in less than 30 days versus more. So the number was about 20. It seemed to be a good break. If I go up to the statistics on threads per MR. So greater than 30 MRs merged in less than 30 days had 18 threads on average, compared with 8 threads for less than 30 days. And the median, 11 for ones greater than 30 days. I'm going to call those late, just to, it's probably a charged term, but late ones were 11 days, non-late 3 days, and 90th percentile 47 days versus 24. So 20 felt like a nice round number. Is this something we want to consider at this time or not, because we're doing these other things and we don't want to, comment and triage issue spam, take the risk of it being perceived as, triage and issue spam?
I think it adds more color to the reason why something is taking the long poll. I asked below if the delay or the long poll is actually review, since it seems to correlate to some of that aspect.
Yeah, and I didn't actually look into it that level of detail, but that'd be great as well if we could get not only time to merge, but where it is in the various stages. So in development, with the reviewers and with the maintainers. I don't know if that's something we can add, but that would be great. I didn't look to see if that exists. I don't think it exists, at least in the table we're looking at now. But that'd be great to add.
The other question would be is if there was a threshold, like if those 20 threads all got created at once, or if those were like done over a period of time. If it turned out that it's like, if you had 5 threads start off immediately, this is already like an early warning that this is going to be a long MR from that perspective, right? Because like if it's added over time, it may just be too much back and forth, but it could be also, I don't know. Like I'm just trying to think about different ways that it may kind of the data. We'd have to dig in and understand the timing of the data.
So go ahead, Kyle.
I was just going to add, as far as adding a comment for this situation, there's not out of the box capability in GitLab Triage to make this determination. So it would be much more challenging than the other things we talked about.
I believe we should talk to the psychoanalytics because we don't use workflow labels for MRs. I don't believe we use all of them, and I think looping in that aspect of the product will help you too.
I don't think we're automatically applying them. So I think they're used informally, but not like workflow labels aren't necessarily applied consistently. Like I've applied a workflow label to an MR manually to signal this is in dev or review or whatever.
So with 5-ish minutes left, I think this has been great discussion. What I'd recommend we do is I'll update the things where we've already discussed. We didn't necessarily go in order, which is of course fine. So I'll catch up on those, like Mech, your items on some of this as well, like where time is spent. Like maybe that's something, Lily, you can look into as well by stage where we know it. And then is this I think we should move this from a Google Doc to maybe to a handbook page and do this as a working group, perhaps? Is that too much for this, or is that appropriate for this?
I think we should ship a few iterations, and then if there are more content to discuss, then let's enact the working group. How does everybody feel about that?
I think I'm okay with that plan. I just got scolded yesterday that I'm involved in too many working groups. I need to figure out how to pare it down. So I was already trying to figure out who the exec sponsor was going to be, and playing chicken with Mech or Wayne on this one.
I had the same challenge as well, Christopher. So if we can do it, I'd rather do it.
You were currently myself, so I could take it, but I will definitely need both of everybody's involvement, at least at the beginning. So just me running with it would not save that much.
Here's maybe the right way to approach it. So I think Mech and I are basically saying we don't have the bandwidth to necessarily drive this, but we want to definitely see the results with it. So if Wayne, you want to be the exec sponsor, 3 things you got to find. So somebody to represent from quality, maybe Kyle, but maybe somebody else as a team member. Somebody to facilitate, which could be one of your engineering managers who is interested in this, or it could be another engineering manager in another organization. Which I think it would be good to have some cross pollination here. So like maybe even somebody from CI/CD that maybe has some time to help with it. And then the third thing is just, the MR to actually merge it. So if you think it's worth, I think I'm kind of on the fence on this one, because like I feel like it could be a short-term thing, or it could actually be a long-term thing, and I can't put my finger on which one it's going to be.
Why don't we do this? Is let's meet again next week. I'll continue the discussion, and then decide.
I do think the content needs to go into an issue, and like the issue that Kyle's going to go work on the triage stuff, we should go document that. So Kyle, where's the best place for us to?
I will take the action to open an issue in triage ops for the policies that we had above. the
Okay.
other items, like the data request for Lily, if we want to track that in a different issue that I can associate this one to, that might make the most sense
Okay.
as well. I'm more than,
By the way, I'm not opposed to working group. I'm just opposed to me being the exec sponsor of the working group.
Well, and working group is supposed to be not short-term things, and this might be short-term.
Yeah.
So, okay. All right. So I'll get us back together in a week. And
Yeah.
then,
I think the one thing though is that we're going to figure out how to slay this tail, and then we're going to get asked to move to the next tail. So that's the one thing I could see. So that's something Becky and I probably need to think about, or there's going to be some other aspect. Last spring we had basically an analytics working group. It may be worthwhile for us to do that again with a different cohort of folks.
The dev metrics.
Yeah, the dev metrics one.
Yeah, this sounds like it. Kyle, awesome stuff. Thank you so much for taking it on.
And Wayne, thanks for doing the analysis. This is awesome.
awesome. All right. Thanks, everybody. Look for a meeting next week. Cheers.
see ya. Thanks, Wayne.